The Positive Pause is a motivational-minded podcast covering topics women want to know about as they journey to and through menopause, focusing on subjects that impact women's health and healthy aging, including what it means to age healthfully. The Positive Pause features experts and influencers from a variety of industries and specialties. The information and opinions expressed on the Positive Pause are not intended to replace the services of trained professionals or to provide specific medical advice. To see the National Menopause Foundation's full medical disclaimer, please visit nationalmenopausefoundation.org.
Welcome to the Positive Pause. I'm Claire Gill, founder of the National Menopause Foundation. Joining me today is Dawn Van Berkel, a mental health counselor and the founder of Her Therapy. He is a dedicated mental health professional who helps women to know that they are not alone with the complex changes that come in midlife. For over 25 years, Dawn has been a force of change, driving transformation and breaking barriers in both corporate and the nonprofit sector. Her mission is to uplift and empower people at every turn. Drawing on her own expertise in navigating life's toughest transition, she's now dedicated to guiding women through the emotional and physical journey of midlife. She is here to help others rise stronger and heal, evolve, and reignite their lives. Dawn is certified in EMDR, parent coaching, nutrition counseling, and sex therapy. Thanks so much for joining me today, Dawn.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, let's just dive in and start talking about your professional background. You went back to school, I understand, in your mid-40s to get your master's degree in counseling. What motivated you to make this career change?
Yeah, so I had dedicated myself to my family for years. We had some pretty complex challenges and it required a lot of my attention and focus. And as many of us do as a mom, I put myself at the bottom of that list. So once we had gotten to a fairly stable section of our lives, I decided that it really was time for me to invest in myself. But the previous career it didn't do it for me. It never held my interest. It just wasn't really what I wanted to do. And at that point, I had been in therapy for a while and sitting there and thinking about how helpful it was and how much I was fascinated with human behavior. And I also just have a natural inclination for helping. I realized that this is something that I wanted to do. And I went through the admissions process. I had to do an admission interview. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was pretty scary. And not to mention, I hadn't been in a classroom for 20 years or more. And most of my fellow students were in their 20s. But I quickly learned to be a student again and loved the interaction in the classes. And it just was such a great experience for me. And now I think I'm able to use all the experience from those previous positions, as well as my wisdom from being a mom to help me in this career. And I really do love it, especially working with women in midlife, navigate those changes. One of the things that wasn't mentioned on my bio is that I'm a trauma therapist as well. But I wanted women to know that it's never too late. You can do it.
That is such a good lesson. And you're right. I have such admiration for women who do go back to school later in life to pursue that knowledge. But we're always learning, right? No matter how we approach it, we should be always learning. And the fact that you took that next step to go back to school and get your master's is pretty amazing. And I'm glad it's been a fulfilling experience then when you're done. I too think about, oh my God, if I had to go back to the classroom today, what that would feel like. But there are so many things that if I just had time and wanted to do it, that I would love to study again. So it would be really great if more of us approach that after we reach midlife, going back to school and really this time focusing on what just makes you thrive, right? And that sounds like that's what you've been doing. But you set up your practice, and it's called Her, and I want to make sure people know it's H.E.R.
Yes.
Therapy, and it stands for Heal, Evolve, Reignite.
Mm-hmm.
What does this mantra mean to you, and how do you apply it for women, particularly women who are struggling with the midlife transition?
Sure. So when we get to an age where many of us are reaching perimenopause, we've been through a lot. There could have been traumatic events or relationships. And in many ways, women are socialized to be people pleasers. As I mentioned before, we take care of everyone else's needs and comforts but our own. And sometimes this can be really emotionally damaging. There can be repressed anger and shame, maybe sadness of how you got to that position. Not to mention being sandwiched in between your kids and your parents who are now aging, who need a little bit more help. Or your kids are exploring their own futures and you're imagining what life is going to be like without them in the house. And that all perhaps makes you want to evaluate your relationship with your spouse or your significant other and decide what you want out of the relationship or even what you don't want out of the relationship. But all of this is stress. And what I would really love is for women to start imagining what the possibilities could be. And this is where this mantra comes in. So healing from whatever challenges that they have faced or might be holding them back, evolving through the help of therapy with these challenges, and then reigniting their lives with new interests, hobbies, maybe a new career, new relationship. But we have to start by putting ourselves first with radical self-care. And that way, the second half of your life can be healing, evolving, and reigniting into whatever you want it to be.
It really is so important that we give ourselves permission to do that, right? And we're kind of battling society's overshadowing role in our lives and what women are supposed to do, what we're supposed to care about, what we're supposed to sacrifice for all of those things. And like you said, it comes with so much shame. And God forbid you don't feel like putting your whole family first, then it's like something to be ashamed of. Even when you're sick, right? Even when we're sick, we take care of everybody in the family who's sick first.
Yeah.
And do that. And that's really like what's expected. It's sort of the norm. And so we do it. But like you said, that builds up some stress and some trauma and anger in that. And it's okay to feel that way.
And the other piece of that is called the term, here's where my perimenopause is coming in the brain fog.
Yeah, brain fog.
The emotional labor of the relationship.
Yes.
And by that, I mean, we typically are the ones who know all the birthdays, know all the favorites, know when all the activities are and the doctor's appointments. And even if our family is helping us, if we have to ask them 7 times to take out the trash, we're still the project managers. And so we're carrying all of that.
Yeah. And it's always interesting, like, again, that even after all these years of evolving in relationships where women are still, in many cases, the breadwinner of the family or, exceeding their husbands in the workplace and stuff like that, that mental load, as you said, continues to be our responsibility.
Yeah.
And it's not like we're bashing the men in our lives. They're terrific. But again, I don't think there's any kind of appreciation for how much women actually do carry, even among other women. Right. So I think sometimes is that we don't give each other grace either. If one woman's complaining about something like that, we think she's ungrateful for what a great marriage she has and her children are healthy. And all of that can be true, but she can still be feeling overwhelmed by that mental load.
Exactly.
So how do you address that then, Dawn? What can we all do to start maybe slowly chipping away at that and better managing it?
Yeah, sure. Well, therapy, of course. But much of it is recognizing that this part of your life can be challenging, accepting it, and then trying to figure out what you can do to move forward. And this is where a lot of these symptoms had come in for me. So I most likely started my perimenopause symptoms about 10 years ago. And I say most likely because no one really put all the pieces together for me. And it started with heart palpitations where I would wake up in the middle of the night and my heart would be racing. And it was kind of scary.
That's awfully scary. Yeah.
And then it started happening during the day. And after a couple of times, I called the doctor to schedule an appointment and they hear heart and they send you to the ER. So I went to the ER and no one really thought much of it. And I kind of even got a little bit of a side eye, like, okay, you're overreacting a little bit. So we get invalidated.
All the
Our
time.
symptoms get invalidated.
All the time.
Mm-hmm. And then the debilitating anxiety started. And this was curl up on the couch, not want to participate in society type of anxiety. And I had never had that before. I'm pretty laid back, and it was really surprising for me. But it was all related to health and illness types of things. So I had to stop watching TV. I had to stop watching the news. My poor kids, every time they would get sick, I would overreact because it was the anxiety.
Yeah.
I tried some medications, and it took the edge off enough so that I could take care of those, functions that I had to take care of.
Yeah. The basics.
But what really helped me was the therapy and being able to go and talk through these things and really just find a place where there's just non-judgmental support. And then came the other symptoms after that, the hot flashes, the brain fog, the weight gain. I had gained 40 pounds in a year and nothing had changed. So you hear hot flashes, you go to the OBGYN, who again just invalidated my symptoms and basically said, exercise harder and wear layers. So that's, again, I felt invalidated. And so I just never really made the connection between all of these symptoms. But about 2 years ago, I started seeing videos on social media. There are some people that are now wanting everyone to know about this field and wanting people to know what those symptoms are. But no one really sat me down and said, all of these things that you're experiencing can be perimenopause. And I'm a learner, like you talked about before, and I would have researched that to death.
Yeah.
But no one really did that for me. And so I want other women to know that they don't have to suffer, that through therapy or with another provider, we can help them see the patterns. And I want to be that person who helps the other women see those patterns. And so they can start to work through them and not think that they have to continue to suffer.
That's so important. I've been saying over and over again since I launched the National Menopause Foundation that somewhere along the line, women have been convinced that there's some kind of prize for suffering, right? That we're supposed to be quiet about our period pain, even though they now say it's the equivalent to having a heart attack pain, right? And we deal with it and we go to school and work and everything every day to it. And then the same thing when it comes to childbirth. There's great resources available, but we're convinced natural is the only proper way to do it. And then the same thing when it comes, as you said, to this stage of life where women are suffering and basically told, oh, you're overreacting. It's natural. Just because it's natural, and it is, doesn't mean we can't seek out support for the pain that comes with this natural stage of life. And I was thinking, as you talked about the mental health aspect of it and having that be something that, again, women aren't aware of. And, we now know that as many as 40% of perimenopause and menopausal women face mental health challenges during the stage of life. And like you, if it hadn't been something that was part of your earlier life, then it wouldn't dawn on you that this might be something that's happening, again, as part of the natural transition. But that shouldn't be left alone to try to figure that out.
No, and one of the things I've learned through my research is that women aged 45 to 54 have the highest suicide rate among women.
Yes.
And that's the average age of menopause.
Right. Big surprise for those of us who have gone through menopause to realize, this is really happening. And I think what's really important, and what I love about the work that you're doing is when you get to that reignite part, we're all about helping women understand their bodies, understand what's happening during this change, but also then helping women realize that this can also be an amazing stage of life, right?
Yes. I have that information as well. I've been researching this, and women that are postmenopausal have greater life satisfaction. They have more patience. They have a stronger sense of well-being. That ability to just not give a crap about anything grows. And sometimes we're given this idea that perimenopause is scary and that this is the end and we're never going to get back to it. But there are studies that indicate that life does get significantly better after.
Yes. Yes. Again, and we don't focus on that nearly as much, right?
Yes.
But I think it comes in stages. There's one thing of, again, no information for women about what's about to happen to them,
Yes.
and then getting through and trying to manage the system. So we're trying to support at all of these different levels. And then also finally in the, okay, so great. Now that you've got these symptoms under control, how do you thrive, right? And we have to make sure that we tackle all of those things. But I want to get back a little bit to what you were talking about with the things you learned and helping again, like through the traumatic part of it and the trauma we carry forward into this life stage or the trauma that we feel during this life phase. And I think that's one of those words that is a trigger for people. Figuratively, even literally, right? Either trauma can be a trigger itself, but also for people who haven't experienced it, they think it's one of those woke words or whatever the current mindset we seem to be in this country. But when we're talking about trauma, let's talk about what trauma really is and what that means and how it can be an everyday thing versus you had something horrible happen to you that you've been holding on to forever. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can, yeah. So what happens is your nervous system reacts. And every time there can be this big trauma that happens to you, but not everyone reacts in the same way. Some people are totally fine with what happened and they can work through it. And then other people aren't. And there's really not a way for us to really tell who's going to react in what way right now. But what happens is our nervous system reacts, and we have what's called a window of tolerance where we can handle normal things. And sometimes we get anxious and sometimes we get a little sad and we kind of cycle through that system.
Yeah.
But that's normal. Those are just normal things. But what happens when our body is in this chronic state of feeling trauma, which is basically, your fight, flight, freeze. Mm-hmm. We've talked about that, or many people have talked about that. That window of tolerance shrinks. And so we're not able to handle those normal things. And our body is constantly in that elevated state, the fight and flight, or that lower state, the hypo state, where you are feeling depressed and sluggish and unmotivated. And what we can do in therapy through many types of things, because therapy is very individual, but is learn to grow that window of tolerance back up. And it helps us to know that the different parts of our brain, one reacts to that trauma, and then the logical part of it kind of stop talking.
Yeah.
And we need to teach them how to talk again. And so some of that is through, meditation or body work or processing through what happened. Not everyone has to talk in detail about what happened to them. If it was a big trauma is what we call it.
Right.
But just learning how to calm that nervous system response back into that window of tolerance so that you can start to process that. That's really the important piece of it.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me how the mind works, how connected our body systems are to each other, right? So your gut health connected to your brain health and all of those things. And so again, when we think about trauma or we think about mental health, support or issues, people always do, go to the extremes and think that's not me, not realizing that in the everyday is where we're experiencing these things. And if you're open, we learn, right?
Yeah.
The mindset of learning, right? I'm going to share something that it's a personal story, but I think it's really relevant, right? I went to therapy for the very first time late in life, like in my 40s. And one of the things that I had shared was my daughter was very little. And when she would get punished for doing something wrong, her reaction was she would be sorry and then she'd be over it, right? Like she'd immediately turn attention to something else. And I was saying, I really have to break her. I have to make her understand that she needs to feel sorry for these things and it's not over in a second. And the therapist said to me, no, Claire, your daughter's reaction is the normal reaction. She gets upset. She's remorseful. She resets. You are not resetting from the high level of aggravation. And she did that. And then going back to normal, you stay at that high rate.
Mm-hmm.
Yours is the not normal one. Oh my God, Dawn, it was worth going to therapy at all to realize that.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no traumatic thing. It was literally a simple parenting thing where I was like, man, she should be upset longer that she did that, right?
Right.
And realizing that I had gotten it all wrong and that it was me that needed to learn to adjust that window that you said, right? The resetting button. So again, it's not necessarily these horrible traumatic things.
No.
It's daily interactions that do that flight or fight, right? I was ready to fight.
Yes. And also expectations of how children are supposed to act in society.
Yes.
And once we realize that they are also learning, their nervous system hasn't developed yet. And sometimes we have to help them.
Yep.
And what that does is help us as well. And like you said, yes, the buildup of all the things that happen to us throughout the years can cause this little T trauma.
Yeah.
But what it does is just elevates our nervous system, and we need to learn how to bring it back into that window.
Right. And so deep breathing, which again is, people think that, again, this is some kind of incredible technique. We do it every day, all day long, right? It's just the focusing on that breath can absolutely change our mindset and physically, right? It can change.
Yeah. The important part of breathing is that your exhale is longer than your inhale. It's the exhale that helps bring that down. So if you're doing it the opposite, then that's more like a hyperventilation type of thing. But so a lot of times we use the inhale for 4, hold it for 7, and then exhale for 8. And it's that longer exhalation that really helps with that calmness.
And can you build up that breath work too? Because for some people, even the holding and then the breathing out, that's longer than the inhale, because it's really hard to people. I find myself just doing a lot of trying to make it extend.
Mm-hmm.
We hear those numbers often, right? There's the box or the thing like that. If someone like in the car wanted to start doing it and build to it, what number should they, like base number should they start with? Does it matter?
No, it doesn't. It's really whatever works for you, as long as the exhale is longer.
Okay.
There's whatever number you want.
That's really good to know, because I think sometimes even that can be intimidating when you're like, I'm not doing it right.
Yes.
But we're breathing. So I love that tip. Just make the exhale longer than the inhale.
Yep.
And you are working on your calming breathing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That's really good.
So one of the things I wanted to get back to is the mental health symptoms.
Yes.
Because the hormone fluctuations can cause the serotonin to rise and fall. And serotonin is one of those happy hormones. And so when it's up and down, then that can cause some emotional symptoms for us, some mental health symptoms. There are a few that have been linked by research, but think of that hormone fluctuation as PMS over months or years rather than just 1 week. So depression has been linked by research to perimenopause, and that can be new or worsening. So if you've had symptoms before, they can get worse during perimenopause, especially if you have had postpartum depression or PMDD. I wanted to talk a little bit about the symptoms for mental health that have been researched, that have been linked with research. And we know that the hormone fluctuations can affect serotonin levels in the brain.
Yeah.
And serotonin is one of our happy hormones. But when we're in menopause, they fluctuate so much that it can cause a lot of emotional symptoms. Think of PMS, but over months and years rather than just that 1 week. But they have done research to link some conditions, and one of them is depression. And that can be new. You've never had it before, or it can be worsening. The symptoms can be more intense. And especially if you've had symptoms before, such as postpartum depression or PMDD, which is premenstrual disorder. And that's like PMS on steroids, basically. or even if you've had really bad emotional symptoms during PMS, you're more likely to suffer from depression during perimenopause. The other condition that has been linked by research is bipolar disorder. And again, that can be new. It can intensify the symptoms if you've had a prior diagnosis, or if you were undiagnosed because your symptoms were more mild, you can then have more intense symptoms during perimenopause and get that diagnosis of bipolar disorder.
Wow, I didn't know that one.
Yeah. And now there's not a lot of research, right? So these are the only two conditions that have been linked by research, but we know that it can cause other things. Anxiety, like I had, anger, irritability, all of those emotional symptoms can just feel incredibly intense during perimenopause.
Yeah. We actually include them in our symptom checklist, right? For clinicians who are trained in helping women in menopause and understanding it, all of those things are things that they check off, right? You should be tracking those types of symptoms as well, because it gives you a better opportunity to have a conversation with your clinician about what's really happening. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean you're still not going to get dismissed, because sometimes, again, clinicians just think, well, that's what happens to women of your age. Deal with it.
And the first line of defense is an antidepressant. And that may not actually be the best first defense. It could be hormones.
It could be estrogen. Exactly.
Yeah.
So important to really find people who understand women's health, and it's particularly women's midlife health. Mm-hmm. And we'll definitely have resources along with you and your practice and all of that, with that women can reach out to find people who actually do specify working with women at menopause to sort of help determine what is the best thing. I love that you said earlier too, Dawn, that the menopausal journey is so personal. And it is, right? We might all bleed when we have our, when we're going through puberty and when we have our periods, but it's not the same. The intensity is not the same. The cycle's not exactly the same. All of those things. So it's similar with menopause. People say, I just breezed through, there was no problem. And I'm fantastic. I'm so glad that it was such an easy experience for women who don't realize that they had symptoms. I think sometimes they may not have even noticed the symptoms that they were having. But again, they didn't feel like it disrupted their lives. And that's fabulous. But so many women talk about the disruption that it does post their lives. I think we have to respect that and be mindful of that as we talk through what happens to women, particularly women to other women, that this is but
even those women who say that they breeze through it still may have other symptoms that aren't those vasomotor symptoms like hot flashes or sleep. They could still have joint problems and increased cardiovascular risk and higher cholesterol, all of those things that we don't necessarily attribute to menopause.
There's so much, right? And we're not taught anything except, you had a hot flash or, you were going crazy. And if those things don't come up to people, they don't think that they had an issue with it. So I think the more we can just do in helping people identify what's happening to their bodies, knowing their own bodies and advocating for themselves when they feel something is off,
Yeah, be empowered to do that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we've made some real progress, in this country, not as much as we need to, but some progress in mental health overall. And so it's really important that we let women know that as they move through this stage of life, that mental health issues are one of those things that can happen, and that there are plenty of people that they can talk to, like you and others who are actually trained to help women deal with this stage of life and some of those other symptoms. So I'm grateful to you for all the work you do. And as I said, particularly as you get people past the challenges and into the thriving and reinvigorating stage, which is
the reigniting stage. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so much so. Okay. So just one last question, and we could talk forever and we'll definitely have you back on, but what's one thing you wish all women approaching menopause would do to better her emotional well-being?
Well, I think that notion of radical self-care is such a foreign concept to so many of us. And we feel selfish when we want to do things for ourselves. If we want to go do a hobby or go to an exercise class, we feel like, oh my gosh, we have to make sure that the dinner's ready and the lunches are packed and our husband is taken care of or our spouse is taken care of. But it's okay to not have dinner ready. It's okay to let the dishes sit in the sink. It's okay to do all of those things because it's that old adage, put your own oxygen mask on first before you put everybody else's on. So they'll be okay. They can order pizza.
That's so true. That's so true. And we've been using a lot of that, put your own oxygen mask on first, because that's basically of survival, right? And so when we talk about that, it seems so simple that these things are not entitlements. They're basic needs that we have to do to be the people that we want to be so that we can continue to support all the people in our lives. And so that's really, really crucially important. So thanks very much for reinforcing that, Dawn. I appreciate you spending time with us and sharing your expertise and your personal journey as well. I hope everyone enjoyed this episode as much as I have. Please do two things. Make sure you subscribe to the Positive Pause podcast so you never miss an episode. And please share this information with your family and friends. It's so important. Thank you again to my guest, Dawn Van Berkel, counselor and owner of Her Therapy. And thank you for listening. We hope you'll turn into another episode of the Positive Pause.